They said a woman alone in the West wouldn't survive a season. Clara Whitfield had 3 hours left to prove them wrong, or lose everything. The autumn sun beat down on that Nevada auction yard in 1878, turning dust to gold and hope to ash. Around her, men traded livestock like poker chips while she clutched a rope halter so tight her palms bled. One horse, one chance. One cowboy watching from the shadows with storm-gray eyes that saw what everyone else missed. A woman fighting not just for survival, but for the right to keep breathing. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's journey has traveled. The wooden benches of the Silverton livestock auction were sun-bleached and splintered, much like Clara Whitfield's hopes on that October afternoon. She sat apart from the crowd of ranchers and speculators, her worn calico dress a faded blue that had once matched her eyes before grief had turned them gray. The auction yard smelled of manure, sweat, and desperation, a scent she'd grown familiar with in the 3 months since her father had been laid in the hard Nevada ground. 22 years old, and she'd already buried both parents. Her mother had gone when Clara was 15, taken by the fever that swept through their valley like an avenging angel. Her father had lasted 7 more years, working their small ranch until his heart simply gave out one morning while checking the fence line. Clara had found him there, slumped against a post, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since her mother died. The bank had come exactly 2 weeks later. Miss Whitfield, the banker had said, standing in her doorway with papers that meant the end of everything. Mr. Cornelius Webb, with his oiled mustache and eyes like chips of flint. "I'm afraid your father's debts have come due. The property will need to be surrendered by month's end." She'd fought. God, how she'd fought. Rode into Silverton 3 times, pleading her case to anyone who would listen. But a young woman alone had no standing, no power, no voice that anyone deemed worth hearing. The law was clear, they said. The debt was real. The land would be sold. They'd taken everything. The house where she was born. The barn her father built with his own hands. The 60 acres of scrubland and creek bottom that the Whitfield family had broken their backs to cultivate. All of it gone, handed over to Webb's bank and sold at auction to a mining company that wanted the water rights. Clara had been allowed to keep exactly 3 things: her mother's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain beneath her dress, a canvas satchel with 2 changes of clothes, and her father's Bible, and 1 horse. That horse was why she was here now, sitting alone while the auction proceeded around her like a river flowing past a stone. "Lot 47, the auctioneer called, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Fine gelding, 6 years old, good for ranch work or pulling a wagon." The bidding was brisk. Men called out numbers with casual authority, as if money grew on trees in their pastures. Clara watched them, weathered ranchers in dusty Stetsons, young cowboys trying to look older than their years, speculators in city suits who saw only profit where others saw living creatures. None of them looked at her. She'd become invisible, she realized, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had no place for her. Women in the West fell into categories: wives, daughters, school teachers, saloon girls. A woman alone, with no family and no prospects, simply didn't exist in the social arithmetic of the frontier. "Sold!" The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Lot 48, coming up." Clara's heart began to pound. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the rope halter, running her fingers over the braided horsehair. Her father had made it for Rosie when the mare was just a filly. 14 years ago now. Clara could still remember watching him work, his strong hands gentle as he wove the strands together. "This is for our girl," he'd said, smiling at 8-year-old Clara. "Every good horse deserves a halter made with love." Rosie. Her last connection to everything she'd lost. The chestnut mare with the white blaze and 3 white socks, wise eyes, and a heart bigger than the Nevada sky. Clara had learned to ride on Rosie's back, had cried into her mane when her mother died, had whispered her fears and dreams to her in the quiet darkness of the barn. The mare was 17 now, past her prime by most standards. But she was sound, willing, and the only thing in the world that Clara could still call her own. "Lot 49, the auctioneer consulted his paperwork. "Chestnut mare, 17 years, gentle disposition, good for light work or as a lady's mount." Clara stood, her legs trembling. This was it. She had $17 to her name, everything she'd earned selling her mother's quilts and her father's tools. It wasn't much, but Rosie wasn't a young cutting horse or a fancy show animal. Surely $17 would be enough. A ranch hand led Rosie into the auction ring. The mare's coat gleamed despite her age, and she walked with her head up, alert and dignified. Clara's throat tightened. She'd spent hours grooming her this morning, wanting her to look her absolute best. "Do I hear $5? The auctioneer began. Clara's hand shot up. $5. The auctioneer's eyes flicked toward her, then away, dismissive. $5 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 6? I made the bid, Clara called out, her voice stronger now. $5. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. The auctioneer frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "Miss, this is a livestock auction. If you're looking to purchase a horse, you'll need to—" "I am purchasing a horse," Clara interrupted, her cheeks burning. "That horse. $5. More laughter. A man in an expensive suit turned to his companion and said something that made them both chuckle. Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Miss Whitfield." The auctioneer's tone was patronizing now, like he was speaking to a child. "This mare, while aged, is still worth considerably more than $5. Perhaps you should—" $6, a gruff voice called from the side of the yard. Clara's stomach dropped. She whirled around trying to identify the bidder, but the crowd was too thick. $6 from Mr. Johnson. Do I hear 7? 7! Clara's voice cracked. She was already going beyond what she could afford, but she couldn't stop now. 8, Johnson countered immediately. The casual way he said it made Clara want to scream. To him, this was nothing, just another transaction in a long day of buying and selling. But to her, this was everything. $9. She was sweating now, despite the autumn chill. 10. Johnson sounded bored. 11. Clara's hand shook as she raised it. 12. 13. Her voice was desperate now, and she hated how it sounded, weak, pleading. 15. Johnson yawned. The auctioneer looked at Clara expectantly. Her mind raced. She had $17. If she bid 16 and Johnson went to 17, she'd have nothing left. No money for food, for lodging, for the stage fare she'd need to go where? She had nowhere to go. But if she lost Rosie, she'd have nothing at all. $16, she whispered, then louder. $16! Johnson shifted his weight. The auctioneer leaned forward. 16 from the young lady. Do I hear 17, Mr. Johnson? The pause stretched out like pulled taffy. Clara couldn't breathe. In the auction ring, Rosie stood patiently, her dark eyes finding Clara in the crowd. The mare nickered softly, a sound Clara knew as well as her own heartbeat. 17, Johnson said. The world tilted. Clara's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. $17, she had exactly $17. 18, she heard herself say. The crowd went quiet. Even the auctioneer looked surprised. Miss, do you have $18? I will, Clara lied. I'll get it. That's not how auctions work, young lady. You need to be able to pay today in full, or $20. The new voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. It was deep, quiet, and carried an authority that made even the auctioneer straighten up. Clara turned toward the sound, and for the first time, she really saw him. He was leaning against the fence at the far edge of the yard, one boot hooked on the lower rail, his dark hat pulled low against the sun. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 30 years old. His clothes were work-worn but well-made, the mark of a man who earned his living but earned it well. But it was his eyes that caught her, storm gray, steady, and fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Cole Harrington. She didn't know his name yet, but she would remember this moment for the rest of her life, the moment someone finally saw her. $20 from Mr. Harrington, the auctioneer said, his tone noticeably more respectful. Do I hear 21? Johnson glanced at the cowboy, seemed to recognize him, and shook his head. That's too rich for my blood for an old mare. She's yours, Harrington. Any other bids? The auctioneer called. Silence. Sold to Mr. Harrington for $20. The gavel came down with a finality that shattered Clara's heart into 1,000 pieces. She stood frozen as the crowd began to murmur and shift, already moving on to the next lot. Rosie was led from the ring toward the holding pens. The mayor looked back once, still searching for Clara. Everything else happened in a blur. Clara was dimly aware of stumbling through the crowd, of people jostling past her, of the sun beating down on her head like a hammer. She found herself at the edge of the auction yard, gripping the fence so hard the rough wood bit into her palms. She'd failed. Failed her father, failed Rosie, failed herself. She had no home, no horse, no future. $17 in her pocket and nowhere to spend them that would matter. "Miss," the voice was quiet, close. Clara turned and found herself looking up at the cowboy who'd bought her horse. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6 feet tall, with sun-darkened skin and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But his eyes were kind. That's what surprised her most. Kind and somehow sad. "Mr. Harrington," she managed, forcing her voice to stay steady. I wanted to buy her myself. That mare. She's mine, was mine. I raised her from a filly." "I know." Clara blinked. "You know?" "Recognized her from your father's place. Used to see her in the pasture when I'd ride past. Beautiful mare. Your father took good care of her." He paused. "Heard about your troubles. I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected kindness made Clara's eyes burn. She looked away, struggling for composure. "Thank you. If you're planning to resell her, I'd like to make you an offer. I don't have $20 now, but I could work, earn the money, and I'm not reselling her." Clara's last hope crumbled. Of course he wasn't. Why would he? She was a good horse, and $20 was a fair price. "I see. Well, I hope you'll be good to her. She likes apples, and she's afraid of pigs. And when you saddle her, you have to make sure the girth isn't too tight, or I'm giving her back to you." Clara stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Cole Harrington pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and held it out. "Bill of sale. She's yours." Clara stared at the paper like it might bite her. "I don't understand. You paid $20 for her." "I did." "But you're just giving her to me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Because watching a woman lose the last thing she loves in this world didn't sit right with me. And because I have a proposition for you, if you're willing to hear it." Clara's relief at getting Rosie back warred with sudden suspicion. She'd heard stories about what happened to women alone in the West, about the propositions they received. She took a step back. "What kind of proposition?" If Cole noticed her wariness, he didn't show it. "A job. At my ranch. I need someone who's good with horses, and from what I've heard, you have a gift with them. My sister's been after me to hire help anyway. Says the place needs a woman's touch." He gestured toward the holding pens. "You'd have room and board, fair wages, and your mare would have a good pasture and a warm barn." Clara's mind reeled. "You're offering me a job? You don't even know me." "I know enough. Know your father was an honest man who taught his daughter to work hard. Know you just bid every dollar you had trying to save your horse. That tells me what I need to know about your character." He tilted his head slightly. "Question is, do you have the courage to start over?" "Start over," Clara repeated slowly. "At your ranch." High Ridge Ranch. About 15 miles north of here, up in the hills. We breed horses mainly, some cattle. It's good land, hard work, but honest." "And your sister lives there too?" "Margaret. She runs the house, keeps the books. You'd have your own room in the main house." Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "Miss Whitfield, I'm not offering you charity, and I'm not offering you anything improper. I'm offering you a chance to earn your own way, in a place where your skills would be valued. But if you'd rather try your luck elsewhere, I understand. No hard feelings." Clara looked past him to where Rosie stood in the holding pen, the mare's familiar shape the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand beneath her feet. She thought of her father, of the lessons he'd taught her. Be strong, Clara. Be smart. And never be too proud to accept help when it's honestly offered. "When would I start?" she asked quietly. Something that might have been a smile crossed Cole's face. "How about now? We can swing by the livery, get your things, and head out before dark. You can meet Margaret tonight, and we'll start you with the horses tomorrow morning." Just like that? Just like that. Clara took a deep breath. Behind her lay everything she'd lost: her home, her past, her childhood. Ahead lay only uncertainty and a stranger's promise. But that stranger had bought her horse for $20 and handed her back without asking for anything in return. That stranger had looked at her and seen a person worth helping, worth hiring, worth trusting. That had to mean something. She reached out and took the bill of sale from his hand. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt the calluses there, the hands of a man who worked alongside his ranch hands, not above them. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "I accept your offer." "Cole," he corrected. "Mr. Harrington was my father." "Cole, then." The name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar, too intimate. But this was the West, where formality often died in the face of practical necessity. "And I'm Clara." "Clara!" He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "Well, Clara, let's get you and that mare of yours home." Home. The word hit her harder than she expected. She'd lost her home. How could he offer her a new one so easily? But as Cole walked toward the holding pens with that steady, unhurried stride, Clara found herself following. What choice did she have? Stay in Silverton with $17 and nowhere to sleep? Take the stage to where? She had no family, no friends outside of this valley. She was alone in the world except for a 17-year-old mare and a cowboy who'd paid $20 for a stranger's peace of mind. Cole handled the paperwork with efficient ease, signed the necessary documents, and arranged for a ranch hand to bring his own horse around. While they waited, Clara climbed the fence and called to Rosie. The mare's ears pricked forward, and she walked over immediately, pressing her soft nose into Clara's palm. "Hey, girl," Clara whispered, running her hand down the familiar white blaze. "We're going to be okay. I think we're going to be okay." Rosie huffed softly, her breath warm against Clara's skin. The mare's dark eyes were calm, trusting. She'd been through the auction, the confusion, the change of ownership, and she still trusted Clara to take care of her. That trust was a weight and a gift, all at once. "She's a good one," Cole said from behind her. He'd returned with 2 horses, a tall bay gelding that must be his mount, and a sturdy gray mare already saddled. "Margaret's horse. You can ride her back to the ranch. One of my men will bring Rosie along with the wagon." Clara turned, surprised. "You came prepared." "Hoped I might change your mind about the job. Wanted to make it easy for you to say yes." He handed her the gray's reins. "This is Stella. She's gentle but smart. Margaret's had her for 5 years." Clara took the reins, then hesitated. "Cole, why did you really do this? Buy Rosie, offer me a job? You don't know me." Cole adjusted his hat, a gesture Clara would come to recognize as something he did when he was choosing his words carefully. "My mother died when I was 12. My father took to drinking after. Margaret was only 8. We had neighbors who could have helped us, but most people looked the other way. Figured a drunk and 2 kids weren't their problem." He met her eyes directly. "One rancher didn't look away. Man named Thomas Brennan. He gave my father a job, let us stay in a cabin on his land, made sure Margaret and I had food and schooling. When my father finally drank himself to death 3 years later, Thomas made sure we didn't end up in an orphanage." Clara's throat tightened. "Thomas died about 10 years back," Cole continued. "Left me and Margaret his ranch and his will. We've built it up since then, made it into something successful, but I never forgot what he did for us." He gathered his bay's reins. "Figured it was time I paid that kindness forward. Thomas Brennan sounds like a good man. Best I ever knew. He used to say that folks in the West had a choice. They could build walls or build communities. He chose communities." Cole swung up into his saddle with easy grace. "So that's what I'm trying to do, build something where people look out for each other." Clara mounted the gray mare, settling into the unfamiliar saddle. Her $17 were still in her pocket, her meager possessions still in her satchel. But for the first time in 3 months, the future didn't feel quite so dark. They rode out of Silverton as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sage-covered hills in shades of gold and amber. Cole set an easy pace, and they rode in comfortable silence for the first few miles. Clara studied the landscape, trying to memorize this journey, the way the valley opened up to the north, the distant line of cottonwoods that marked a creek, the purple shadows of mountains on the horizon. "Those are the Ruby Mountains," Cole said, following her gaze. "The ranch sits in the foothills where the grassland meets the timber. Good water, good grazing. The name High Ridge comes from the ridge that runs behind the main house. You can see clear across the valley from up there." "How big is the ranch?" "About 800 acres of deeded land, plus grazing rights on another few thousand acres of BLM land. We run about 50 head of cattle and maybe 30 horses at any given time. We're building a reputation for good saddle horses, strong, smart, with calm temperaments. Margaret handles the business side. I manage the livestock, and we have 4 full-time hands plus seasonal help during roundup." Clara did the mathematics in her head. That was a substantial operation. "And you need someone specifically for the horses?" "We're expanding the breeding program. I want to develop a line known for being especially good with new riders. Women, children, older folks who might be nervous around horses. That takes careful breeding, but also careful training. Horses that are handled right from the start, with patience and understanding." He glanced at her. "Your father had that touch. Saw him once at the general store with a young colt that was spooked by the crowd. He just stood there, quiet and calm, until the colt settled. Never raised his voice, never jerked the lead, just waited. That's a rare gift." "He taught me everything he knew," Clara said softly. "Said horses were honest creatures. They might be afraid, but they'd never lie to you about it. Said working with horses taught you patience, and patience taught you wisdom." He was right. They rode on as the shadows lengthened. Cole pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, an old line shack from the mining days, the turnoff to a neighbor's spread. He talked easily, never prying, never pushing, just offering information like gifts she could accept or ignore as she chose. Clara found herself relaxing despite her circumstances. There was something solid about Cole Harrington, something that made her instinctively trust him. It wasn't just his size or his obvious competence. It was the quiet way he moved through the world, like a man who had nothing to prove and no need to be anything other than what he was. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said as they forded a shallow creek. "Of course." "Back at the auction, when you bid on Rosie, you were watching me. How long had you been watching?" Cole was silent for a moment. "Since you first sat down. You looked so alone, but you were sitting straight, holding that halter like it was made of gold. There was something about the way you held yourself, proud, even though the world was trying to break you." He paused, reminded me of Margaret after our mother died. Same look in the eyes, same determination not to cry in front of strangers. "Did she cry when she was alone?" "Every night for a year, but in the daytime she was strong as iron. 8 years old and already learning to protect herself by not showing weakness." Cole's voice roughened slightly. "No child should have to learn that, and no woman should have to face the world alone with nothing but $17 and a prayer." Clara's eyes stung. $16? I spent one on breakfast this morning." "Then I'm glad I stepped in when I did." They emerged from a stand of juniper trees, and Clara caught her first glimpse of High Ridge Ranch. The house was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. The barn was new, the wood still golden in the fading light. Corrals, outbuildings, a bunkhouse, all laid out with the practical efficiency of a working ranch. But what caught Clara's breath was the setting. The ranch sat in a natural amphitheater of hills, with the dramatic ridge Cole had mentioned rising behind it like a protective wall. Aspen trees clustered near the house, their leaves turned golden with autumn. A creek sparkled as it wound past the barn, and everywhere horses, in the corrals, in the pastures, moving like pieces of a living painting across the land. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "It's home," Cole said simply. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the house. She was in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and Cole's same gray eyes. She wore a simple dress with an apron over it, and her expression was both curious and welcoming. "Margaret," Cole called as they dismounted. "This is Clara Whitfield. Clara, my sister Margaret." Margaret came down the porch steps with her hand extended. "Miss Whitfield, Cole sent word from town that he hoped to convince you to join us. I'm so glad you said yes." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you to your room, and then we'll have supper. You can meet the hands tomorrow when you're rested." "Thank you," Clara managed. "And please, call me Clara." "Clara, then. And I'm Margaret." She looped her arm through Clara's with easy familiarity. "Come on, I'll show you the house, and Cole can take care of the horses. That's his job anyway." Cole touched his hat brim in a gesture that was both respectful and slightly amused. "Welcome to High Ridge, Clara. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Clara followed Margaret into the house, leaving Cole in the yard with the horses. As they crossed the threshold, she looked back once. He was loosening his bay's girth, his movements practiced and efficient, but he glanced up as if feeling her gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, a connection that Clara couldn't name but could feel all the way down to her bones. Then Margaret was pulling her inside, chattering about where to put Clara's things and asking if she preferred coffee or tea with supper, and the moment broke. But Clara carried the feeling with her as she climbed the stairs to the second floor, as Margaret showed her to a small but clean room with a real bed and a window overlooking the ridge. "This was meant to be a guest room," Margaret explained, "but we don't get many guests out here. It's yours now for as long as you want it." Clara set her satchel on the bed and turned to look at the room that was now hers. Simple furniture, bed, dresser, washstand, a small desk under the window, but clean, welcoming, safe. More than she'd dared hope for when she'd woken up that morning in the boarding house. "Margaret," she said quietly, "why did Cole really hire me? And please, I need the truth." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. "The truth is, we do need help with the horses. That part's genuine. Cole's vision for the breeding program is sound, but he can't do everything himself." She smoothed her apron absently. "But the larger truth is that Cole has a bit of a savior complex. Comes from our childhood, I think. He couldn't save our mother, couldn't save our father, but he's damn well going to save everyone else he can." "So this is charity?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "That's where you're wrong. If you couldn't do the work, Cole wouldn't have offered the job. He's kind, but he's not foolish. He saw something in you at that auction, Clara. Whatever it was, it convinced him you were worth the gamble." She smiled slightly. "And my brother is many things, but he's not often wrong about people." Clara sank into the chair by the window. "I don't know the first thing about running a breeding program." "But you know horses. You know how to gentle them, train them, understand them. The rest you can learn." Margaret stood. "Look, I'll be honest with you. Life on a ranch is hard. The work is physical, the hours are long, and there will be days when you're so tired you can't see straight. But it's also honest work, good work. And you won't be alone. We're building something here, Clara, something that lasts. You can be part of that if you choose. And if I can't do it, if I fail, then you fail. But at least you'll have tried, and at least you'll have a roof over your head and food in your belly while you figure out what comes next." Margaret moved to the door. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper's in an hour. Wash up, rest a bit, and come down when you're ready. No rush." After Margaret left, Clara stood at the window and looked out over High Ridge Ranch. The sun had set now, and the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. Lantern light glowed from the barn and bunkhouse. Somewhere below, a horse nickered. The creek whispered its endless song. For the first time since her father died, Clara felt something unfurl in her chest. Not hope. It was too soon for hope. But possibility. The faint, fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life from these ruins. That maybe losing everything didn't mean the end of her story, but the beginning of something new. She pulled her mother's ring from beneath her dress and held it to the light. The simple gold band gleamed softly, a circle with no beginning and no end. Her mother had worn it every day of her married life. Her father had kissed it every night before bed, even years after her mother was gone. "I don't know what I'm doing," Clara whispered to the ghosts of her parents, "but I'm going to try. I'm going to be brave. I promise." The ring swung gently on its chain, catching the starlight. And in that moment, standing in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere with nothing but $16 and a borrowed horse outside, Clara Whitfield made a choice. She would survive. More than that, she would live, and she would make them proud. The rooster's crow shattered Clara's sleep at what felt like the middle of the night. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed, disoriented, her heart pounding before she remembered where she was. The room was still dark, but through the window she could see the faint gray line of dawn touching the eastern horizon. High Ridge Ranch. Her first morning. Clara dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on her oldest work dress and the sturdy boots she'd resoled twice already. Her hands trembled slightly as she braided her hair, nerves, exhaustion, or perhaps the weight of starting over in a place where she knew no one and everything depended on proving her worth. When she made her way downstairs, she found Margaret already in the kitchen, working at the massive cast-iron stove. The smell of coffee and frying bacon made Clara's stomach clench with hunger. "Good morning," Margaret said cheerfully, as if 5 in the morning was a perfectly reasonable time to be awake. "Coffee's on the table. How do you take your eggs?" "However they come is fine," Clara said, pouring herself a cup. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and she'd never tasted anything better. "Can I help with anything?" "Not this morning. Sit, eat, get your strength. Cole will have you working hard enough soon." Margaret cracked eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. "The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but family takes breakfast here. Cole should be in any minute. He's been up since 4 checking on a mare that's close to foaling." As if summoned by his name, the back door opened and Cole stepped in, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses and the cold morning air. He hung his hat on a peg and nodded to Clara. "Morning. You sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. In the lamplight, she could see Cole more clearly than she had the day before. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and a tiredness in his face that suggested he'd been up most of the night. "Margaret mentioned a mare. Is everything okay?" "False alarm. She's not as close as I thought. Probably another day or 2. He poured his own coffee and leaned against the counter. "After breakfast, I'll show you around properly. Introduce you to the horses, the layout of the barn, where we keep the tack and feed. Then we'll see what you can do." It wasn't quite a challenge, but Clara heard the unspoken question. Could she really do this work? Was Cole's faith in her justified, or had he made a mistake? "I'm ready," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. "I believe you are." They ate quickly, the food plain but plentiful. Margaret kept up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the neighbors, the rhythm of the seasons. Clara learned that winter came hard this far north, that spring brought mud that could swallow a wagon, that summer was brief and precious, and fall arrived too soon. She learned that the nearest town was Silverton, 15 miles south, and that supplies came once a month from a freight wagon out of Elko. "It's isolated," Margaret said frankly, "but that's part of the appeal. Out here you make your own community, the Brennans to the east, the Suttons to the west, a few smaller spreads scattered around. We look out for each other." After breakfast, Clara followed Cole out into the pale morning light. The air was crisp and cold, sharp enough to make her breath visible. Frost glittered on the grass and fence rails. The mountains to the east were turning pink with sunrise. Cole walked her through the layout of the ranch with the same methodical patience he'd shown the day before. The main barn, solid and well-built, with stalls for 20 horses and a tack room that smelled of leather and oil. The breeding barn, smaller, designed for mares and foals. The corrals, the breaking pen, the covered arena for working horses in bad weather. The hay barn, already half full with the summer's cutting. The workshop where saddles could be repaired and horseshoes shaped. "We're mostly self-sufficient," Cole explained as they walked. "Have to be, this far from town. The hands know how to do a bit of everything: carpentry, blacksmithing, veterinary work. You'll learn as you go." They stopped at the main corral where a dozen horses milled about, their coats shaggy with their winter growth coming in. Cole leaned on the fence, and Clara stood beside him. "That bay in the corner is Dancer. She's our best broodmare. The gray is Whiskey. He's ornery but solid. The paint is calico, sweet as sugar, but not the brightest. The black is Midnight, 3 years old, just started under saddle." He pointed them out one by one, and Clara committed each name and description to memory. And that one? She nodded toward a rangy chestnut gelding standing apart from the others. That's Copper. He came to us 6 months ago from a ranch that was going under. Been mistreated, we think. Won't let anyone catch him without a fight, and he's never been fully broke to saddle. Cole's voice was neutral, but Clara heard the frustration beneath it. Been working with him steady, but he's got walls up thicker than any horse I've known. Clara studied the chestnut. He was watchful, tense, his ears swiveling constantly to track every movement in the yard. When Cole shifted his weight, Copper took 3 quick steps back. Can I try? The words were out before Clara could think better of them. Cole looked at her, surprise evident on his face. You just got here. You don't need to prove anything on your first day. I'm not trying to prove anything. Clara searched for the right words. I know what it's like to have walls up, to be afraid of everything because you've already lost so much. Understanding flickered in Cole's eyes. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but take your time. No pressure. Clara climbed the fence and dropped into the corral. The other horses moved away, giving her space, but Copper planted his feet and watched her approach with wild eyes. She could see the white showing all around his pupils, see the tension quivering through his muscles. She stopped 20 feet away and simply stood there. Didn't move toward him, didn't speak, didn't look directly at him. Just stood, breathing slowly, letting him see that she wasn't a threat. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. From somewhere beyond the barn, Clara could hear the ranch hands beginning their day, voices calling back and forth, the clang of a bucket. But here in the corral, there was only silence and stillness and a damaged horse who'd forgotten how to trust. Slowly, so slowly that Clara almost didn't see it happen, Copper's head lowered an inch. His ears, which had been pinned back, swiveled forward slightly. One hoof relaxed. Clara took a single step to the side, not toward him, just a shift of position. Copper tensed but didn't bolt. She waited, took another step, angling away from him now, making herself less threatening. The gelding's head came up again, but his weight shifted onto 3 legs. The 4th hoof, the one closest to Clara, lifted slightly. That's right, Clara murmured, so soft the words were almost soundless. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here. Another step. Then another. She was moving in a wide circle around Copper now, never approaching directly, never staring, just moving quietly through his space like water flowing around a stone. The gelding turned to keep her in sight, but he was breathing easier now. The panic was fading from his eyes, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. Clara stopped moving and stood with her back partly turned to him. A deliberate vulnerability, a show of trust. She could feel Cole watching from the fence, could sense the attention of the other horses, but she kept her focus soft and her breathing steady. Everything her father had taught her about working with frightened animals came back to her now, the patience, the empathy, the willingness to work in horse time rather than human time. A sound behind her, the soft thud of a hoof in dirt. Clara didn't turn. Another step. Closer. She could hear Copper breathing now, could smell the warm horse scent of him. A whisper of air against her neck. His breath, as he stretched his nose toward her to investigate this strange human who wouldn't chase him or force him or demand anything from him. Clara waited until she felt the velvet softness of his muzzle brush her shoulder. Only then did she turn, slowly, and raise her hand. Copper's eyes were still wary, but the wildness had gone out of them. When her fingers touched his neck, he flinched but didn't run. Good boy, Clara whispered. Brave boy. I know you're scared. I know someone hurt you, but not everyone will. Some people are safe, some places are home. She stood there with her hand on Copper's neck until he relaxed into the touch, until his head lowered and his breathing slowed. Only then did she step back, giving him space again, showing him that trust worked both ways. When she turned toward the fence, she found Cole standing exactly where she'd left him, but his expression had changed. There was something in his eyes now, wonder, maybe, or recognition. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Well, he said as she climbed back over the fence, I'd say you've got the job for certain now. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I didn't do much. Just stood there. You did exactly what he needed. That's not nothing. Cole pushed away from the fence. Come on, Let's get you acquainted with the rest of them. And Clara, that was something special to see. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Cole introduced her to the 4 ranch hands: Miguel, a weathered Mexican cowboy who'd worked for Thomas Brennan and stayed on after; young Danny, barely 18 but already skilled with a rope; Jim, quiet and competent, who managed the cattle; and Ben, the oldest of them, who served as the ranch's unofficial veterinarian and farrier. They were polite but reserved, clearly waiting to see if this city girl, for that's how they'd see her, Clara knew, despite her ranching background, could actually pull her weight. She didn't blame them. She'd have to earn their respect the same way she'd have to earn everything else here. Cole set her to work in the breeding barn, checking on the pregnant mares, making sure their water troughs were clean and their hay was fresh. It was simple work, but Clara approached it with the same care she'd use for more complex tasks. Details mattered. A mare with a dirty water trough might not drink enough, might develop complications. A barn cat that looked thin might indicate a rodent problem that could contaminate the feed. She worked steadily through the morning, pausing only when Margaret brought her a sandwich at noon. "Cole's impressed," Margaret said, sitting on a hay bale while Clara ate. "He came back from the corral this morning looking like he'd seen a miracle." Clara shook her head. "It wasn't a miracle, just patience." Patience is a miracle on a working ranch. Most folks don't have time for it. Margaret picked a piece of straw from her skirt. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you want, Clara? Long term, I mean. Is this just a stopping point while you figure out what's next? Or are you thinking about staying?" It was a fair question, and one Clara didn't have a clear answer for. "I don't know," she admitted. "Yesterday morning, I thought my life was over. Today, I'm working in a barn in the middle of nowhere, and it feels like maybe I can breathe again. I can't think further ahead than that right now." "That's honest. I appreciate that." Margaret stood, brushing hay from her dress. "Just so you know, you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay, whether that's a week or a year or the rest of your life. You're not a burden, Clara. Your help we genuinely need." After Margaret left, Clara returned to her work, but the conversation stayed with her. The rest of your life. Could she really imagine that? Building a life here on this ranch, with these people who were still strangers? The afternoon brought new challenges. Cole had her help with training a 2-year-old mare to accept a saddle blanket. The filly was skittish, dancing away every time Clara approached with the blanket. "Don't force it," Cole instructed, watching from outside the round pen. "Let her see it's not a threat." Clara worked with the same patience she'd shown Copper, advancing and retreating, letting the filly investigate the blanket on her own terms. It took an hour, but eventually the young mare stood still while Clara draped the blanket across her back. "Good," Cole said. "That's enough for today. She's learned something positive, and we're ending on a good note. Always quit while you're ahead with young horses." As Clara unsaddled Rosie that evening, Cole had brought the mare over from town that afternoon. She found herself reflecting on the day. Her muscles ached from unaccustomed work. Her hands were rough from handling ropes and halters, and she was so tired she could barely stand. But it was good tired, honest tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing work that mattered. "How was your first day?" Cole asked, appearing in the barn doorway as Clara was hanging up Rosie's halter. "Long," Clara admitted, "but good. The horses are wonderful. They seem to like you too. Even Copper watched you all day from the corral." Cole leaned against the stall door, his hat in his hands. In the golden light filtering through the barn, Clara noticed details she'd missed before. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the quiet strength in his hands. She looked away, confused by the direction of her thoughts. Cole was her employer, nothing more. She couldn't afford to think of him as anything else. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, focusing on coiling a lead rope. "For yesterday. For seeing me when no one else did." "Clara." Something in his voice made her look up. "I didn't hire you out of pity. I hired you because you're good at what you do, and because this ranch needs someone with your skills. Don't sell yourself short." Their eyes met across the barn aisle, and Clara felt that strange connection again, the one that had sparked at the auction, that had hummed beneath every interaction today. It was unsettling and compelling all at once. "I should get back to the house," she said, breaking the moment. "Help Margaret with supper." "Right. Yes." Cole stepped back, and Clara couldn't tell if she'd imagined the reluctance in his movement. "See you at supper, then." The days began to establish a rhythm. Clara rose with the dawn, worked alongside Cole and the ranch hands until dark, fell into bed exhausted, and slept dreamlessly until the rooster crowed again. The work was relentless, but satisfying. She learned the personality of each horse in the string, learned which mares were dominant and which were followers, learned to read the subtle signs that indicated a horse was off its feed or developing a limp. Cole proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the reasoning behind every decision, encouraging her questions, trusting her judgment more and more as the days passed. He had a gift for breaking down complex ideas into simple steps, and he never made her feel foolish for not knowing something. "How do you decide which mares to breed to which stallions?" Clara asked one afternoon as they reviewed the breeding records in the barn office. Cole spread out a chart showing the lineage of their horses. "It's part art, part science. You're looking at temperament, conformation, bloodlines. You want to reinforce strengths and compensate for weaknesses. Dancer, for example. She's got excellent bone structure, but she's a bit hot-tempered. We breed her to a stallion with a calmer disposition, hoping the foals inherit her physical strengths and his mental stability." "And does it work?" "Sometimes. Genetics is unpredictable." He traced a line on the chart. "But over time, with careful selection, you can develop a consistent type. That's what we're building here, a reputation for horses that are sound, sensible, and suited for everyday riders." Clara studied the chart, fascinated by the complexity of it. "My father only ever had 3 or 4 horses at a time. I never thought about breeding on this scale." "It's a long game. The horses we're breeding now, we won't see the results for years. That's why you need a clear vision and the patience to stick with it." Cole rolled up the chart. "Thomas Brennan used to say that ranching was an exercise in delayed gratification. You work today for rewards you might not see for a decade." "Sounds like you really admired him." "I did. Still do." Cole was quiet for a moment. "He was the kind of man who made you want to be better. Not by criticizing, just by example. I try to run this place the way he would have wanted." "I think you're doing that," Clara said softly. Cole looked at her, surprise and something warmer flickering across his face. "That means more than you know, coming from you." Before Clara could respond, Danny burst into the office, breathing hard. "Cole! The mare! Dancer! She's foaling and something's wrong!" They ran to the breeding barn, Clara matching Cole stride for stride. Inside, they found Dancer down in her stall, her sides heaving, but the foal wasn't coming. Miguel stood outside the stall, his face grim. "She's been laboring for 2 hours," he said. "Foal's not positioned right. We need to turn it." Cole stripped off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Clara, I need you to hold her head. Talk to her. Keep her calm. This is going to hurt, and she's going to want to fight." Clara knelt in the straw by Dancer's head, laying a gentle hand on the mare's neck. The horse's eyes were wild with pain and fear, her breath coming in harsh gasps. "Easy, girl," Clara murmured. "We're going to help you. I know it hurts, I know you're scared, but we're here. You're not alone." Cole moved to Dancer's hindquarters, reaching carefully to assess the situation. His face was tight with concentration. "Foal's coming backward. One leg's folded under. I need to push it back and reposition." What followed was one of the longest hours of Clara's life. She held Dancer's head, whispered reassurances, stroked the mare's neck while Cole worked with infinite patience to turn the foal. Miguel stood ready with clean towels. Danny had run to fetch Ben, whose veterinary experience might be needed. Dancer groaned, a sound that tore at Clara's heart. The mare tried to rise to escape the pain, but Clara held her gently firm. "I know," she whispered. "I know it hurts, but you have to trust us. Just a little longer, sweet girl. Just a little longer." "Almost there," Cole said, his voice strained. "Come on, little one. Work with me." And then, with a rush of fluid and a final push from Dancer, the foal slid free. Cole caught it, clearing its nose and mouth quickly. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the foal gasped, coughed, and took its first breath. "It's a filly," Cole said, and his voice was rough with relief. "And she's breathing strong." Clara sat back, her arms trembling from holding Dancer's considerable weight. The mare lifted her head, turning to see her foal, and made a low nickering sound that was pure mother love. "Good girl," Clara told her. "You did so good. Look at your beautiful baby." They stayed in the stall for the next 2 hours, monitoring both mare and foal, making sure the filly could stand and nurse, checking for any complications. By the time they were confident both were stable, full dark had fallen. Clara and Cole walked back to the house in silence, both too tired for words. Margaret took one look at them and had hot water ready for washing up. "How are they?" she asked. "Strong," Cole said. "Both strong. Thanks to Clara. I couldn't have managed it without her." "I didn't do anything," Clara protested. "You were the one who turned the foal." "You kept Dancer calm. That's everything in a situation like that. A frightened mare can kill herself in the foal trying to escape the pain." Cole's eyes met hers. "You have a gift, Clara, a real gift." Later, lying in bed too exhausted to sleep, Clara thought about those words. A gift. Was that what this feeling was? This sense of rightness when she was working with the horses, this deep understanding that needed no words. Her father had felt it too. She remembered watching him with a fractious stallion once, saw how he'd gentle the animal with nothing but patience and presence. "Horses speak a language older than words," he'd told her. "You just have to learn to listen." Clara was learning to listen. And what she heard was the possibility of a future she'd never imagined, a life built not on what she'd lost, but on what she could create. The weeks flowed into each other like water. October gave way to November, and the first snows dusted the high peaks. The ranch settled into the slower rhythm of winter, feeding hay to the horses, breaking ice on water troughs, preparing for the long, cold months ahead. Clara's place at High Ridge became more certain with each passing day. The ranch hands, who'd been skeptical at first, now sought her opinion on difficult horses. Margaret had stopped asking if she needed help and started asking for her help with everything from training advice to menu planning. And Cole was becoming a problem Clara didn't know how to solve. She found herself watching for him in the mornings, listening for his voice, timing her work so their paths would cross. When he praised her handling of a difficult colt, warmth bloomed in her chest that had nothing to do with pride in her work. When his hand brushed hers reaching for the same halter, electricity sparked along her skin. It was foolish. Dangerous. He was her employer, her benefactor, the man who'd saved her from destitution. She couldn't risk the stability she'd found by developing feelings she had no right to feel. But telling herself that didn't make it true. One evening in late November, as they were closing up the barn together, Cole said, "There's something I want to show you, if you're not too tired." "I'm never too tired for horses," Clara said, then felt her cheeks warm at how that sounded. If Cole noticed, he didn't show it. He led her not to the corrals, but up the hill behind the ranch, following a narrow trail through the aspen trees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the snow-covered peaks glow like they were lit from within. They emerged onto the ridge that gave the ranch its name, and Clara's breath caught. From here, she could see the entire valley spread out below, the ranch buildings like toys, the ribbon of creek silver in the fading light, the vast sweep of land stretching to the mountains on every side. "Thomas brought me up here the first week we lived on the ranch," Cole said quietly. "I was 13, angry at the world, convinced nothing would ever be right again. He didn't say much, just stood here with me and let me see how big the world was, how small my problems were in comparison." He turned to Clara, "but also how much possibility there was. All this space, all this land, room to grow, room to build something that mattered." "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "I come up here when I need perspective. When the work feels too hard or I'm not sure I'm doing right by the ranch, by Margaret, by the hands who depend on me." He was quiet for a moment. "I came up here the night before the auction. Couldn't sleep, kept thinking about how we needed help, but couldn't afford to hire someone who wouldn't pull their weight." Clara looked at him. "And I asked Thomas for guidance. I know he's gone, but sometimes I still talk to him up here. Ask him what he'd do." Cole's smile was self-deprecating. "Probably sounds foolish." "No," Clara said firmly. "It sounds like you loved him and you miss him. That's not foolish." "I told him I needed a sign, something to show me the right path forward." Cole's gray eyes found hers in the twilight. The next day, I saw you at that auction. Saw you fighting for what you loved with everything you had. And I knew. Clara's heart was beating too fast. Knew what? That you were the sign I'd been waiting for. That bringing you to High Ridge was the right thing to do. He took a step closer. I haven't regretted it for a single moment, Clara. You've made this place better just by being here. She should step back, should maintain the distance that propriety demanded, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away from the intensity in his eyes. Cole, I know this is complicated, he said quietly. I know I'm your employer, that you might feel obligated, that you've only been here a few months. But I also know that when you walk into a room, the whole place feels lighter, that when you smile, it's like the sun coming out, that when I'm working beside you, I feel more myself than I ever have. Clara's breath caught. I feel it too, she whispered. I've been trying not to, trying to tell myself it's just gratitude or loneliness or maybe it's just real, Cole said. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were gentle, his touch sending shivers down her spine. Maybe sometimes the simplest answer is the truest one. They stood there on the ridge as the stars began to appear, the vast Nevada sky opening up above them. Clara knew this moment would change everything, knew that if she leaned into his touch, if she admitted what was growing between them, there would be no going back to the careful professional distance they'd maintained. But maybe, she thought, some walls were meant to be broken down, some risks were worth taking, some connections were too strong to deny. I think, she said softly, that I'd very much like to see where this path leads. Cole's smile was like dawn breaking. Then let's walk it together. He didn't kiss her, not yet. That would come later, Clara sensed, when the time was right. For now, it was enough to stand beside him in the gathering darkness, their hands finding each other with the inevitability of rivers flowing downhill, and know that she was no longer alone. She'd come to High Ridge Ranch with nothing but heartbreak and $16. But she was discovering that sometimes losing everything was just the beginning. Sometimes the fall was necessary for the rise that would follow. And sometimes the cowboy who said, "She's coming home with me," at a dusty auction, wasn't taking something away. He was offering something she'd never dared to dream of: a home, a purpose, and the quiet, steady promise of love. The walk down from the ridge that November evening had been slow, neither of them wanting to break the spell that had settled over them like first snow. Cole's hand remained wrapped around Clara's, warm and solid, and she marveled at how natural it felt, as if they'd been walking together like this for years instead of mere minutes since crossing the invisible line between employer and something infinitely more complicated. Margaret had taken one look at their faces when they returned to the house and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. She simply set extra coffee on the table and retreated to the kitchen, giving them the privacy of the front room where a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. They sat together on the worn sofa, not quite touching but close enough that Clara could feel the warmth radiating from Cole's body. The silence between them was comfortable, full of possibilities that didn't need words yet. "I should tell you," Cole said eventually, his voice low, "that I don't take this lightly. Whatever this is between us. I'm not a man who makes promises I can't keep." "I know," Clara said, and she did. Everything about Cole Harrington spoke of steadiness, of a man who measured his words and his commitments with equal care. "I wouldn't be here if I thought otherwise." "Good." He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious in the firelight. "Because I need you to understand something. You're not obligated to feel anything for me just because I gave you a job. If you ever want to leave, to go somewhere else, I'll help you do that. I'll give you references, traveling money, whatever you need. Your place here isn't contingent on—" Clara placed her fingers gently against his lips, silencing him. "Cole, I know the difference between gratitude and this. What I feel when I'm with you, when I see you working with the horses, or laughing with your sister, or standing on that ridge talking to ghosts. That's not obligation. That's something I've never felt before, and it terrifies me, but I'm not going to run from it." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "You terrify me too," he admitted, in the best possible way. They stayed like that until the fire burned down to embers, talking quietly about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the small moments that had shaped them into the people sitting on this sofa in the middle of the Nevada wilderness. When Clara finally climbed the stairs to her room, her heart felt too full for her chest to contain it. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing storms that piled snow 3 feet deep and turned the ranch into an isolated white kingdom. The work became harder, more demanding. Paths had to be cleared daily to reach the barns. Water troughs froze solid overnight and had to be broken with axes each morning. The horses grew shaggy winter coats and huddled together for warmth. But the isolation also brought an unexpected intimacy to life at High Ridge. With travel impossible and neighbors snowed in on their own ranches, the little community of the ranch drew closer. Evening meals stretched longer, filled with stories and laughter. Cole taught Clara to play chess by the fire. Margaret showed her how to knit, though Clara's attempts produced scarves that looked more like abstract art than functional clothing. The ranch hands took turns cooking their specialties in the bunkhouse and invited the household to join them. Through it all, Clara and Cole's connection deepened. They worked side by side in the barns, their movements developing the unconscious synchronization of long practice. When a blizzard trapped them in the breeding barn for 6 hours waiting out the worst of the storm, they talked about Cole's plans for expanding the breeding program and Clara's ideas for a gentling program for troubled horses like Copper. "You really think it could work?" Cole asked, watching her sketch out her ideas in the dust on a feed bin. "Taking in horses other people have given up on." "I know it could work," Clara said with conviction. "Look at Copper. 3 months ago, he wouldn't let anyone near him. Now he comes when I call, takes treats from my hand, lets me brush him. He'll never be an easy horse, but he could be someone's loyal companion if given the chance." "We'd need more facilities. A separate training area, maybe another barn for quarantine in case the horses come in with illness or injury. It wouldn't have to be anything fancy at first, just a round pen and a few stalls." Clara's enthusiasm was building. "We could start small, take in 1 or 2 cases, build a reputation. Once people see what's possible, word will spread." Cole studied her face, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're really passionate about this." "Every horse deserves a second chance," Clara said quietly, "just like every person does." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You're remarkable, Clara Whitfield. You know that?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just remarkable," he repeated firmly. "Don't argue with me." The blizzard finally broke near midnight, and they made their way back to the house through snow that glittered like diamonds under the stars. At the bottom of the porch steps, Cole pulled Clara gently to a stop. "I want to kiss you," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "But I want to do it right, not rushed, not hidden. I want to court you properly, the way you deserve." Clara's heart swelled. In a world where women often had little say in their own destinies, Cole was giving her choice, respect, time. "What does courting look like on an isolated ranch in the middle of winter?" "I guess we'll figure that out together," Cole said. And the warmth in his smile made Clara forget the cold entirely. They did figure it out, creating their own traditions in the weeks that followed. Cole left small gifts on her pillow: a perfectly shaped pine cone, a book of poetry he had ordered from town before the snows came, a wooden horse he'd carved during long winter evenings. Clara baked his favorite dried apple pie and left slices wrapped in cloth in the barn office. They took long rides when the weather permitted, exploring the winter-locked valley. Cole showed her the line shack where he and Margaret had spent their first winter with Thomas Brennan, the frozen waterfall in the high canyon, the place where eagles nested each spring. "This is my favorite time of year," Cole confided one crystal-clear January afternoon as they sat on horseback overlooking the ranch. "Everything's stripped down to essentials. No pretense, no decoration, just survival and the people you trust to survive with." Claire understood what he meant. The harsh winter had a way of revealing what mattered and burning away what didn't. And what mattered, she was discovering, was the life she was building here: the work, the horses, the community, and most of all the steady, patient man beside her who was teaching her that love didn't have to be complicated or dramatic to be real. Winter began to loosen its grip in late February. The days grew imperceptibly longer. The snow started to melt in patches, revealing brown grass beneath. The horses began shedding their winter coats in great clumps that blew across the yard like tumbleweed. And Clara realized with a start that she'd been at High Ridge Ranch for 5 months. 5 months that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and like no time at all. "You're different," Margaret observed one evening as they worked together in the kitchen. "Lighter, somehow, more settled." Clara thought about that as she kneaded bread dough. "I feel different, like I've finally stopped running from what happened and started running toward something instead." "Toward my brother, you mean?" Margaret's tone was teasing but kind. "Toward a life," Clara corrected, though she couldn't suppress her smile. "Your brother just happens to be a significant part of it. He's in love with you, you know. Won't say it yet because he's stubborn and old-fashioned and wants to wait for the right moment, but it's written all over his face every time he looks at you." Clara's hand stilled in the dough. "Margaret, I know, I shouldn't interfere. But I've known Cole his whole life, and I've never seen him like this. You make him happy, Clara, really happy, and that makes me happy." Margaret squeezed her shoulder, and "Just don't make him wait too long for that right moment. My brother overthinks everything." March roared in with warm winds that turned the snow to slush and the creeks to torrents. The pregnant mares were moved to the foaling barn, where they could be monitored closely. Calving season started for the cattle, bringing sleepless nights and constant vigilance. The ranch came alive with new life. Wobbly-legged foals, bawling calves, the cacophony of birth and renewal. Clara worked 18-hour days, helping with difficult births, bottle-feeding orphaned calves, monitoring new mothers. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream, and woke each morning to start again. But she loved it. Loved the satisfaction of a successful delivery, the joy of watching a newborn foal take its first steps, the deep rightness of helping new life enter the world. Cole was everywhere at once during those weeks, in the calving sheds, the foaling barn, the breaking pens where yearlings were being started under saddle. Clara would catch glimpses of him throughout the day, and their eyes would meet across the chaos, and they'd share a smile of mutual exhaustion and exhilaration. One evening in late March, Clara was closing up the breeding barn when Cole found her. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his clothes stained with every fluid a birthing animal could produce, but his eyes were bright. "Come with me," he said. "There's something you need to see." He led her to the far pasture where Dancer grazed with her 5-month-old filly, the one they'd fought so hard to save back in November. The foal had grown strong and healthy, her coat already showing the rich bay color she'd inherited from her mother. "I've been thinking about what to call her," Cole said, leaning on the fence. "Every foal needs a proper name, not just a barn name." "What did you have in mind?" "Hope." Cole turned to face Clara. "I want to call her Hope because she was born on the same day you decided to stay at High Ridge, and both of those things gave me something I'd stopped believing I'd find." Clara's throat tightened. "Cole, I know I said I wanted to wait for the right moment, but Margaret informed me I'm overthinking things." His smile was rueful. "She's probably right, so I'm just going to say it. I love you, Clara. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you at that auction, sitting there so alone but refusing to break, and I've been falling deeper every day since." "I love you too," Clara said, and the words felt like coming home. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid that if I admitted how much you mean to me, somehow I'd lose it all again. But I'm tired of being afraid." Cole crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "Then let's both stop being afraid." When he kissed her, it was gentle and sure, a promise and a question all at once. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, tasting sun and dust and the sweet inevitability of finally surrendering to what had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait, but life's too uncertain, and tomorrow's not guaranteed, and I don't want to waste another day not being your husband." Clara laughed, giddy with joy and disbelief. That was possibly the worst proposal in the history of proposals. "Is that a no?" "That's a yes, you fool. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." They stood there in the gathering dusk, holding each other while Hope and Dancer grazed peacefully nearby, and Clara thought about how far she'd come from that lost girl at the auction. She'd found more than a job at High Ridge Ranch. She'd found a home, a purpose, and a love she'd never imagined possible. But life, as Clara was about to learn, had one more test to throw at them before their happiness could be secured. The first sign of trouble came in mid-April, during a stretch of unseasonably hot, dry weather. The winter snows had melted fast, but spring rains hadn't come. The grass was growing, but it was tinder dry. The creeks were running low. Old-timers in town muttered about drought and fire danger, but spring fires were rare enough that most people dismissed the concerns. Cole didn't dismiss them. He had the hands-clear brush from around the buildings, checked and rechecked the water barrels stationed at strategic points around the ranch, made sure every bucket and barrel that could hold water was filled and ready. Clara watched him work with growing unease. "You really think we're in danger?" she asked one evening as they walked the perimeter of the main barn. "I think it pays to be prepared," Cole said. "One lightning strike, one careless campfire, and this whole valley could go up. The wind's been strong, the humidity's low, and we haven't had rain in 3 weeks. All the conditions are right for disaster." 3 days later, disaster found them. Clara was in the breeding barn with the last of the pregnant mares when she heard the shout. She ran outside to find Danny pointing toward the ridge behind the ranch, his face pale. "Smoke," he said. "On the north face." Clara's eyes followed his gesture, and her blood turned to ice. A thin gray column was rising from the timber above the ridge, almost invisible against the pale spring sky. Even as she watched, it grew thicker, darker. Cole came running from the house, Margaret close behind. He took one look at the smoke and started barking orders. "Miguel, Jim, get the horses from the north pasture into the corrals now. Ben, start wetting down the roofs. Danny, ring the bell. We need every hand we can get. Margaret, pack emergency supplies and get them loaded in the wagon. Just in case." "What about the mares?" Clara asked, already knowing the answer and dreading it. The breeding barn held 5 pregnant mares, all within days of foaling, and Hope, Dancer's filly, who'd become Clara's special project. Moving them would be risky. Leaving them could be fatal. Cole's face was grim. "We move them last, if we have to. Right now we need to save the main herd." The next hours were a blur of controlled chaos. The wind had picked up, pushing the fire down the ridge toward the ranch. Smoke thickened in the air, making eyes water and throats burn. The horses sensed the danger and fought being moved, their fear making them wild and unpredictable. Clara worked alongside the men, catching panicked horses, coaxing terrified animals into corrals, all while keeping one eye on the growing pall of smoke. The fire was moving faster than anyone had anticipated, feeding on the dry timber and pushed by gusting winds. "It's jumped the creek," Ben shouted, pointing. And indeed, embers were now raining down on the ranch itself, starting small spot fires in the dry grass. Cole made a decision. "Everyone to the breeding barn. We're moving those mares now, then we're getting everything we can toward the south pasture. If the fire makes it to the buildings, we can't stop it." They ran for the breeding barn. Inside, the mares were frantic, smelling smoke, hearing the shouts and chaos. Clara went straight to Dancer, the mare she'd bonded with during that long-ago difficult birth. "Easy, girl," she said, though her own hands were shaking. "We're going to get you out of here." Cole was already opening stalls, haltering the other mares. "Clara, take Dancer and Hope. Get them to the south pasture. Margaret's there with the wagon." "I'm coming back," Clara said. "Like hell you are. Once you're safe—" "Cole," Clara's voice cut through his protest. "We don't have time to argue. I know these horses. I can help move them faster than anyone." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded sharply. "Be careful. If the fire gets too close—" "I know. Go." Clara led Dancer and Hope out of the barn into a world transformed. The sky had turned an apocalyptic orange. Ash fell like snow. The roar of the fire was audible now, a freight train bearing down on them. Hope pranced nervously at the end of her lead, but Dancer trusted Clara and stayed calm, and the filly fed off her mother's confidence. They made it to the south pasture where Margaret waited with several other ranch wives who'd seen the smoke and come to help. Clara handed off the horses and ran back toward the breeding barn. The heat was intense now, like standing too close to a forge. Clara could see flames on the ridge, a wall of orange and red consuming everything in its path. The main barn was on fire, flames licking up the sides despite Ben's efforts with the water barrels. In the breeding barn, Cole and Miguel were struggling with a mare who'd gone into full panic. She was rearing, striking out with her front hooves, eyes rolling white with terror. "I can't get close to her," Miguel shouted over the noise. Clara didn't think, she just moved. She slipped into the stall, making herself small and non-threatening, and started humming, the same wordless tune her father had used to calm frightened horses. It was barely audible over the chaos, but the mare's ears flicked toward her. "That's it," Clara murmured. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we're leaving now. All of us together." Somehow, impossibly, the mare's panic eased enough for Clara to slip a halter over her head. She led her out of the stall, past Cole's shocked face, out into the nightmare outside. They made 2 more trips, moving the remaining mares. On the last run, Clara paused at the barn door. The fire was close now, so close she could feel individual waves of heat rolling over her. The main barn was fully engulfed. Smaller outbuildings were catching. "That's all of them," Cole said, appearing at her elbow. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke. "Now we go." They ran for the south pasture, and halfway there, Clara realized Copper wasn't with the herd. The damaged gelding she'd spent months gentling, who'd finally learned to trust again. He was still in the north corral, the one closest to the fire. "Cole, Copper—" "I know." His jaw was tight. "We can't. The fire's already there." Clara pulled away from him and started running toward the north corral. Behind her, she heard Cole curse and follow. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see. The heat was like a physical wall, pushing her back. But through the orange haze, she could see Copper running frantically along the corral fence, looking for escape. The fire was less than 100 yards away and closing fast. "Clara, we have to go." Cole grabbed her arm. She shook him off and climbed the fence. "Open the gate. I'll get him out." "You'll get yourself killed." "I'm not leaving him." Cole stared at her for one agonized moment, then ran to open the gate. Clara dropped into the corral and walked straight toward Copper, projecting every ounce of calm she didn't feel. The gelding saw her and screamed, a sound of pure animal terror. He reared, came down, spun away. But he didn't run. Somewhere in his frightened mind, he remembered this human who'd shown him patience and kindness. "Copper," Clara called, her voice somehow steady despite her pounding heart. "Come on, boy, we're leaving. Trust me one more time." The fire roared closer. Embers fell around them like deadly fireflies. Clara could smell burning wood, burning grass, the acrid stench of a world being consumed. Copper took a step toward her, then another. His whole body was trembling, but he came. Clara caught his halter and turned toward the open gate. Cole was there, silhouetted against the flames like a figure from a nightmare. They ran together, Clara leading Copper, Cole right beside them, as the fire roared into the corral they'd just left. They made it to the south pasture where everyone had gathered, the ranch hands, Margaret, the neighbor women, all the horses they'd managed to save. Behind them, High Ridge Ranch burned like the end of the world. Clara collapsed in the grass, coughing so hard she thought her lungs would come up. Cole dropped beside her, pulling her against him. "Don't ever," he said hoarsely, "ever do anything like that again." "Had to," Clara managed between coughs. "Couldn't leave him." "You beautiful, foolish, brave woman," Cole said, and kissed her soot-stained forehead. They watched through the night as the fire consumed the main barn, the outbuildings, the carefully maintained infrastructure of the ranch. But the house stood, protected by the stone construction and the wide cleared space around it. The breeding barn survived, far enough south to escape the worst. And most importantly, all the horses and cattle were safe, driven to pastures the fire couldn't reach. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, Clara stood with Cole's arm around her waist, surveying the damage. It looked catastrophic. Black skeletons of buildings, scorched earth, the acrid smell of destruction everywhere. "We'll rebuild," Cole said quietly. "It'll take time, but we'll rebuild. Better and stronger." Clara thought about everything she'd lost and found again. Her parents, her childhood home, her old life, all gone. But from those ashes had risen something new and precious. High Ridge Ranch could rise from these ashes too. "Yes," she said, leaning into Cole's solid warmth. "We will. Together." And in that moment, with the taste of smoke still bitter on her tongue and the man she loved at her side, Clara understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was running into the fire anyway, for the things and people you couldn't bear to lose. The morning after the fire felt surreal, like waking from a nightmare only to find the monster still sitting at the foot of your bed. Clara stood in what had been the main barn, or at least where it had stood, and tried to reconcile the blackened timbers and twisted metal with the place where she'd spent countless hours working with the horses. The smell of wet ash was overwhelming. The volunteers had spent half the night dousing hot spots to prevent the fire from reigniting. Cole appeared beside her, 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. But when he handed her the coffee, his touch was gentle. "Margaret's making breakfast for everyone who helped last night," he said. "Figured the least we could do is feed them before they head home." Clara took the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. Despite the spring sunshine, she felt cold down to her bones. "How bad is it, really?" Cole surveyed the damage with the practiced eye of someone taking inventory of loss. "Main barn's a total loss, same with the hay barn, the equipment shed, and 2 of the smaller outbuildings. We lost most of our tack, all the winter hay stores, and probably half our tools and equipment." He paused, taking a long drink of coffee. "Could have been so much worse. The house standing is a miracle. The breeding barn surviving means we can still operate. And every single animal made it out alive. That's what matters most." "How much will it cost to rebuild?" "More than we have." Cole's voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the worry beneath it. "We had some savings, but not nearly enough for this kind of reconstruction. We'll need to take out loans, maybe sell some of the herd to raise capital." Clara's chest tightened. She knew what the horses meant to Cole, how carefully he'd built up the breeding program. Selling them would be like cutting off a piece of himself. "There has to be another way," she said. "I'm open to suggestions." Cole tried for a smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "But right now, I don't see many options. The bank in Silverton will give us a loan, but the terms won't be generous, and we'll need to show we can pay it back, which means demonstrating income. Income we won't have while we're rebuilding instead of breeding and training horses." They stood in silence, staring at the ruins. Clara thought about her father, about how he'd worked himself into an early grave trying to keep their small ranch afloat. She thought about the auction, about losing everything, about the desperation that came with having no options left. "What if we didn't rebuild right away?" Clara said slowly, an idea taking shape. "What if we focused on what we can do now, with what we have, and built revenue that way?" Cole looked at her curiously. "I'm listening. The breeding barn is intact. We have all the mares, including the ones about to foal. We have Copper and the other horses we've been training." Clara's words came faster as the plan crystallized. "What if we did what I suggested back in the winter? Opened a program for difficult horses. Other ranchers would pay to have their problem horses trained, and we'd be using the facilities we already have instead of having to build new ones first." "Training problem horses," Cole repeated thoughtfully. "We'd need to advertise, build a reputation. Word of mouth spreads fast out here, and you have connections, people who've bought horses from the ranch, neighbors who respect your work. If we can prove the concept with a few horses, more will come." Clara warmed to the idea. "We could also offer breeding services. Stud fees from the stallions we kept, boarding fees for mares people want bred to our stock. That's income that doesn't require new buildings." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he calculated. "It could work," he said finally. "It wouldn't be fast money, but it would be steady income while we rebuild. And if we're careful about expenses, if we do most of the work ourselves—" He turned to Clara, and something bright flickered in his exhausted eyes. "You know what? It could actually work." "Of course it could work. I suggested it, didn't I?" Clara bumped his shoulder with hers, trying to lighten the moment. Cole pulled her close, heedless of who might see. "What would I do without you?" "Lucky for you, you'll never have to find out." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity that made the regular ranch work seem leisurely by comparison. Word of the fire spread through the valley, and neighbors appeared without being asked, bringing lumber, tools, helping hands. The Brennan family, Thomas's distant cousins who'd inherited his original homestead, arrived with a wagon full of supplies and 3 strong sons who worked from dawn to dusk. The Suttons brought food and blankets. Even families Clara had never met showed up, because that's what people did in the West. When disaster struck, you helped, because someday you might need that help yourself. Cole threw himself into the reconstruction with an intensity that worried Clara. He was up before dawn and worked long after dark, refusing to rest even when exhaustion made his hands shake. She understood the driving need, his ranch, his responsibility, his failure to prevent the disaster. But she also saw how it was consuming him. "You need to sleep," she told him one evening when she found him in the breeding barn long after everyone else had gone to bed. He was repairing damaged stall doors by lamplight, his movements mechanical with fatigue. "I'll sleep when the barn's finished," Cole said without looking up. "Cole." Clara took the hammer from his hand. "You're no good to anyone if you work yourself into collapse. And you're certainly no good to me." That got his attention. He looked up at her and she saw the desperation in his eyes. "I should have been more prepared. Should have had better fire breaks. Should have cleared more brush. Should have controlled the weather. Should have prevented lightning." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "This wasn't your fault. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's nothing anyone could have done to prevent them. What matters is what you do after." "And what am I doing after? Watching my ranch fall apart? Going into debt that might take years to repay?" "You're surviving. You're adapting. You're showing every person who's helped us this week why Thomas Brennan believed in you." Clara's voice was fierce. "You're being the man I fell in love with, the one who steps up when things are hard, who takes care of his people, who doesn't quit even when quitting would be easier." Cole closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. "How are you so strong?" "I learned from the best," Clara said softly. "My father taught me that you can't control what life takes from you, but you can control what you build with what remains. And you taught me that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of something better." "I did say that, didn't I?" Cole's smile was tired but genuine. "Probably should take my own advice." "Probably should." Clara kissed him gently. "Now come to bed. The barn will still be here tomorrow." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time since the fire, Clara saw some of the tension ease from Cole's shoulders. He was learning what she'd already discovered, that you didn't have to carry everything alone, that love meant sharing the weight. As April slipped into May, the ranch began to take shape again. Not the same shape as before, they couldn't afford that yet, but a new configuration that matched their new reality. A simple pole barn went up where the main barn had stood, functional, if not fancy. The equipment shed was rebuilt smaller but more efficient. They created additional corrals and a covered training arena using salvaged materials and donated lumber. And Clara's plan began to bear fruit. The first problem horse arrived in early May, a 3-year-old gelding named Thunder, who'd developed a reputation as a bucker. His owner, a rancher named Peterson from over near Elko, had been ready to sell him for dog food when he heard about Clara's work with Copper. "Heard you got a magic touch with troubled horses," Peterson said, watching skeptically as Clara approached Thunder in the round pen. "But I gotta warn you, this one's got a mean streak." Clara studied Thunder, noting the tension in his body, the way he kept his hindquarters pointed toward her, ready to kick if she got too close. But she also saw the fear in his eyes, the defensive posture of an animal that expected to be hurt. "He's not mean," Clara said quietly. "He's scared. Someone's been rough with him." "Well, yeah, had to be firm with him after he bucked off my nephew. Nearly broke the boy's arm." Clara bit back the response she wanted to make, that being firm often meant being cruel, and that cruelty created more problems than it solved. Instead, she simply nodded and turned her attention to Thunder. She worked with the gelding for an hour while Peterson and Cole watched from outside the pen. She didn't try to catch him, didn't push him, just moved quietly in the space with him, letting him see she wasn't a threat. Gradually, Thunder's tension eased. His ears came forward. He began to track her movements with curiosity rather than fear. "I'll need 2 weeks with him," Clara said when she finally left the pen. "Maybe 3. And I need your promise that when he goes back to you, you'll treat him kindly. No harsh bits, no spurs, no jerking on the reins." Peterson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Clara's expression stopped him. "Fine. But if he's still bucking after 3 weeks, I'm selling him." "He won't be," Clara said with quiet confidence. She was right. Thunder responded to patient, consistent handling the way all frightened creatures did, with gradual trust. By the end of the first week, Clara could catch him, halter him, and lead him around without any resistance. By the end of the second week, she had a saddle on him and was doing groundwork. And by the end of the third week, she was riding him around the arena with Cole watching from the fence, a look of pride and amazement on his face. "You're extraordinary," he said when she dismounted. "You know that?" "I'm patient," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." "No," Cole said firmly. "You're extraordinary, and Thunder's owner is going to tell everyone he knows about what you did here. This is going to change everything for us, Clara." He was right. By mid-June, they had 4 horses in training, with 3 more scheduled to arrive in July. The boarding fees were modest but steady, and the reputation Clara was building brought other opportunities. Ranchers asked her advice on training problems. A family from Silverton hired her to teach their daughter to ride. Someone from as far away as Carson City wrote asking if she'd consider gentling a traumatized mare who'd survived a barn fire. "We're going to make it," Margaret said one evening as she reviewed the account books. "It's going to be tight for the next year or 2, but the numbers work. We can pay back the loans, rebuild properly, and still keep the breeding program running." Cole pulled Clara close and kissed the top of her head. "We're going to make it," he repeated, and Clara heard the wonder in his voice, as if he was still surprised that disaster hadn't destroyed them. But making it financially was only part of the equation. Cole seemed determined to make up for what he saw as his failure with the fire by being perfect at everything else. He pushed himself relentlessly, worked impossible hours, took on every difficult task himself rather than delegating. Clara watched him burning himself out and felt helpless to stop it. The breaking point came in late June, during an especially hot spell that left everyone irritable and exhausted. Cole had been working on repairing fence line in the north pasture, backbreaking work in the heat, and came back to find that one of the boarded horses had gotten loose and trampled through Margaret's vegetable garden. "How the hell did this happen?" Cole demanded, staring at the destroyed garden with something close to desperation in his eyes. "Who left the gate unlatched?" "It was an accident," Miguel said carefully. "Danny thought I'd closed it. I thought he had—" "An accident," Cole repeated, his voice rising. "An accident like the fire was an accident? How many more accidents can we afford before this whole place falls apart?" "Cole," Clara said quietly, touching his arm. He shook her off. "No. I'm tired of making excuses. I'm tired of things going wrong. I'm tired of—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he was yelling at people who'd done nothing but help him for months. "I'm sorry, I need to think." He walked away toward the ridge, his shoulders rigid with tension. Clara let him go, knowing he needed space. But when he hadn't returned by dark, she went looking for him. She found him on the ridge where he'd first told her he loved her, sitting on a boulder and staring out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and rose that made the burned areas of the ranch less visible, more like shadows than scars. "Margaret's garden will recover," Clara said, sitting beside him. "And Danny and Miguel feel terrible. They don't need you making them feel worse." "I know." Cole's voice was flat. "I shouldn't have yelled." "No, you shouldn't have. What's really going on, Cole?" He was quiet for so long Clara thought he might not answer. Then slowly he said, "I'm scared. Terrified, actually. Every time something goes wrong, every setback, every accident, I'm convinced it's the thing that's finally going to break us. That I'm going to lose the ranch, lose everything Thomas built, let down everyone who depends on me." "You won't," Clara said firmly. "You don't know that. My father lost everything to whiskey. What if I lose everything to bad luck and poor decisions?" "Your father lost everything because he gave up. You won't do that." But Clara took his hand. "But Cole, you can't control everything. You can't prevent every accident, fix every problem, carry every burden yourself. That's not strength. That's martyrdom. And martyrs aren't much good to anyone." Cole laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "Tell me how you really feel." "I feel like the man I love is drowning himself in work and worry because he thinks he has to be perfect. I feel like he's forgotten that he has people who love him and want to help carry the load." Clara moved to kneel in front of him, making him look at her. "I feel like I'm watching you do to yourself what your father did, just with work instead of whiskey, and it's breaking my heart." Cole's face crumpled. He pulled Clara against him and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. I don't know how to not be responsible for everything. You learn, Clara said simply. You trust your people to do their jobs. You accept that mistakes happen and the ranch won't fall apart because of a trampled garden. You let me help you carry this instead of shutting me out. She pulled back to look at him. You remember that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. When did you get so wise? When I lost everything and discovered I was still standing. When a cowboy at an auction saw me instead of looking through me. When I learned that starting over wasn't the end of the world. It was just the end of the world I knew. Clara kissed him softly. You gave me a second chance at life, Cole. Let me give you a second chance at believing you're enough, just as you are. They sat together as the stars emerged, talking quietly about fears and hopes and the weight of responsibility. Cole admitted he hadn't been sleeping well, that he woke in the night convinced he smelled smoke. Clara confessed that she sometimes still felt like an imposter, like someone would discover she didn't really belong at High Ridge and send her away. You belong here more than anyone, Cole said fiercely. This ranch would have fallen apart after the fire without you. Your ideas saved us, Clara. Your work is keeping us afloat. You're not an imposter. You're the heart of this place. Then maybe, Clara said slowly, we both need to start believing what we tell each other. You need to believe you're enough. I need to believe I belong. And we both need to trust that we're stronger together than we ever could be apart. I can do that, Cole said, starting now. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden box Clara had never seen before. When he opened it, she caught her breath. Inside was a ring, simple silver set with a small but perfect sapphire that caught the starlight. This was my mother's, Cole said quietly, the only thing of hers I kept. I was saving it for the right moment, the perfect moment, but I'm done waiting for perfect. He slipped off the boulder and went to one knee in the dust. Clara Whitfield, will you marry me? Not someday when the ranch is rebuilt and profitable again. Not when everything's perfect, but now. This summer. While we're still in the middle of the mess and the uncertainty. Marry me because we're partners in all of it. The triumphs and the disasters, the good days and the impossible ones. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's a much better proposal than your first one. Is it still a yes? It's absolutely a yes. She slid from the boulder into his arms, and he put the ring on her finger where it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. When? Whenever you want. Tomorrow if you'd like. Clara laughed. Margaret would kill us if we didn't give her time to plan something. How about July? A summer wedding, simple and small, just family and the neighbors who helped us? Perfect, Cole said, and kissed her under the stars that had witnessed so much of their journey. They walked back down the ridge hand in hand, and Clara felt something shift inside her, a settling, a rightness, a sense of pieces clicking into place. She'd arrived at High Ridge Ranch 7 months ago with nothing. Now she had everything that mattered, a home, work she loved, people who'd become family, and a man who saw her, really saw her, and loved what he found. The next morning, they announced their engagement at breakfast. Margaret shrieked with joy and immediately started making lists. Miguel and the ranch hands congratulated them with backslapping and grins. Even the horses seemed to sense the happiness, prancing in their corrals when Clara went out to do morning chores. Mrs. Harrington, Cole said later, trying out the name. They were working together in the training arena, Clara riding Thunder while Cole set up Cavaletti for her to work over. Has a nice ring to it. It does, Clara agreed, though I'll miss Whitfield. It's the last piece of my father I carry. Then keep it, Cole said simply. Clara Whitfield Harrington. Take both names. Carry your past into your future. Clara's throat tightened with love for this man who understood what things meant, who never asked her to leave pieces of herself behind. Clara Whitfield Harrington, she repeated. Yes, that's perfect. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur. They worked on the ranch during the day and planned their future at night. Cole took Clara to ride through the hills one evening, following a narrow trail that climbed higher than she'd been before. At the top of a rise, he stopped and gestured to the valley below. See that land there? The section between the creek and that line of pines? Clara nodded. I bought it last year. 160 acres. I've been waiting for the right time to do something with it, but I think I know now." He turned to her. "I want to build us a house there. Not right away. We can live in the main house with Margaret until we've rebuilt the barns and paid down the loans. But eventually, a place that's just ours, where we can raise our children and build our own piece of High Ridge Ranch." Clara looked at the land he indicated, a beautiful section of valley with good water, shelter from the wind, and a view that stretched forever. She could picture it, a house nestled against the hillside, children playing in the yard, horses grazing in lush pastures, their future made real. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's ours," Cole corrected. "Or it will be after we're married. I'm putting it in both our names. Everything I own, everything I build. It's as much yours as mine. Partners in everything, remember?" Clara turned to him, this man who gave without counting the cost, who loved without holding back. "How did I get so lucky?" "Pretty sure I'm the lucky one," Cole said, pulling her close. "The cowboy who said she's coming home with me at that auction, best decision I ever made." They stood together on the hillside, looking out over the land that would someday hold their home, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From despair to hope, from loss to love, from an ending to a beginning. The fire had tested them, but it hadn't broken them. If anything, it had forged them into something stronger, individually and together. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, Clara found herself smiling. In 3 weeks, she'd become Cole's wife. But in all the ways that mattered, she already was. They'd built something together in the ashes of disaster, not just a ranch, but a partnership that could weather any storm. And that, Clara thought, was worth more than all the gold in Nevada. The morning of Clara's wedding dawned clear and perfect, the kind of July day that made the Nevada sky look like polished turquoise. She woke in her room at High Ridge Ranch for what Margaret kept calling the last time as a single woman, though Clara pointed out she'd still be living in this house after the ceremony, at least until they could build on the land Cole had shown her. "It's not the same," Margaret insisted, bustling around with Clara's dress, a simple but elegant cream-colored gown they'd ordered from a dressmaker in Elko. "After today, you'll be Cole's wife. Everything changes." Clara thought about that as Margaret helped her dress, pinning up her hair with wildflowers they'd gathered the evening before. Everything changes. In some ways, Margaret was right. Marriage would formalize what already existed between her and Cole, would give their partnership legal standing, would mark her transformation from Clara Whitfield into Clara Whitfield Harrington. But in the ways that truly mattered, nothing would change at all. She and Cole had already committed to each other in the quiet moments on the ridge, in the work they did side by side every day. In the future they were building together from ash and hope and stubborn determination. The ceremony today was just making visible what had been true for months. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, stepping back to admire her work. There were tears in her eyes. "Cole's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Clara studied her reflection in the small mirror. The dress fit perfectly, skimming her figure without being immodest. The wildflowers in her hair, purple lupine and white columbine, added a touch of color that matched her eyes. But more than the dress or the flowers, Clara saw something else in her reflection. Confidence. Belonging. The face of a woman who knew exactly where she was meant to be. "Thank you," Clara said, turning to hug Margaret. "For everything. For welcoming me, for being the sister I never had, for helping me believe I deserved this happiness." "Oh, now you've got me crying for real," Margaret said, dabbing at her eyes. "And I spent 20 minutes on this face. Come on, before we both dissolve into puddles. Your cowboy's waiting." They'd chosen to hold the ceremony outdoors, in the meadow south of the main house where the fire hadn't reached. Neighbors had helped set up simple benches, and someone had strung wildflowers along the makeshift aisle. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect, honest and beautiful, just like the life Clara was choosing. As she walked down that aisle on Miguel's arm, the old cowboy had teared up when she'd asked him to give her away. Clara's eyes found Cole's, and everything else faded to insignificance. He stood beneath an archway the ranch hands had built from aspen branches, wearing his best suit, his dark hair slicked back, his gray eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that Clara felt her own eyes sting with tears. "You look like a dream," Cole said when she reached him, taking her hands in his. His voice was rough with emotion. "You look pretty good yourself, cowboy," Clara managed, and the small gathering of neighbors and friends laughed. The circuit preacher who visited the valley twice a year performed the ceremony, his words simple and traditional. But when it came time for vows, Cole had insisted they write their own. Clara Whitfield, Cole said, his hands steady even though Clara could feel the emotion vibrating through him. I vow to stand beside you through every season, the harsh winters and the gentle springs, the fires that destroy and the rains that restore. I vow to see you, really see you, the way I did that day at the auction when everyone else looked through you. I vow to build our life together with patience and love, one day at a time, one choice at a time. And I vow to never forget that the best thing I ever brought home wasn't a horse, it was you. Clara's tears spilled over. She'd known Cole was going to say something meaningful, but she hadn't expected him to reach so deeply into her heart and pull out exactly what she needed to hear. Cole Harrington, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tears. I vow to be your partner in all things, the triumphs and the disasters, the profitable years and the lean ones, the easy days and the impossible ones. I vow to trust you enough to share my burdens and strong enough to help carry yours. I vow to remember that home isn't a place, but a person, and you are my home. And I vow to never stop being grateful that a cowboy saw a lost girl at an auction and said, "She's coming home with me." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Cole kissed her, the gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Clara kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, feeling the solid reality of his arms around her, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. Margaret had prepared a feast with help from the neighbor women, roasted venison, fresh bread, pies made from the first cherries of the season. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was dancing in the meadow, laughter echoing off the hills. Clara danced with Cole, with Miguel, with Ben, with young Danny, who blushed scarlet when she asked him. She danced until her feet hurt and her cheeks ached from smiling. As the sun began to set and the party showed no signs of slowing, Cole caught Clara's hand and pulled her away from the crowd. They walked hand in hand toward the corrals, where the horses were watching the festivities with interest. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, though she didn't really care as long as Cole was leading. "Just wanted a moment alone with my wife," Cole said, testing out the word. "My wife? I like the sound of that." "I like it too," Clara admitted. They stopped at the fence, and Rosie came over immediately, nickering a greeting. Clara stroked the mare's nose, remembering the day at the auction when she'd thought she'd lost everything. "Seems fitting that Rosie's here to see this. She's been with me through all of it." "She's a good horse," Cole said, pulling an apple from his pocket and offering it to the mare. "You know what I thought about this morning while I was getting ready?" "What?" "That day at the auction when I bid on Rosie. I told myself I was buying her to give back to you, but that wasn't entirely true." Cole's smile was sheepish. "I was also buying her because I wanted an excuse to talk to you, to offer you the job, to bring you home." Clara laughed, delighted by this confession. "So you're saying you spent $20 just to have a reason to approach me?" "Best $20 I ever spent," Cole said firmly. He turned to face her, leaning back against the fence. "You know what else I thought about? How different everything would be if I hadn't gone to that auction. If I'd stayed home that day, if I'd gone earlier or later, if I'd sat somewhere else and never seen you." "Don't," Clara said, touching his face. "Don't think about the what-ifs. We're here now. That's what matters." "You're right. We're here now." Cole pulled her close, and they stood together watching the horses graze in the golden evening light. From the meadow behind them came the sounds of fiddle music and laughter, the celebration continuing without them. "Are you happy, Clara?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "Are you?" "More than I have words for." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Come on, Mrs. Harrington, let's get back to our party before Margaret sends a search party." The summer days that followed the wedding were some of the sweetest of Clara's life. She and Cole fell into an easy rhythm of partnership, working together during the day and retiring to the room they now shared at night. The ranch continued its slow but steady recovery from the fire. The new barn took shape piece by piece. The training program flourished, with a waiting list of horses needing Clara's patient touch. The breeding program produced 3 healthy foals, including one from Dancer that they named Promise. But it wasn't all easy. August brought a drought that dried up the smaller creeks and forced them to move cattle to higher pastures. September brought an early freeze that killed Margaret's second planting of vegetables. October brought the first anniversary of Clara's arrival at High Ridge, and with it, unexpected grief for everything she'd lost before finding this new life. Cole found her crying in the barn one evening, sitting in the stall where Rosie dozed peacefully. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her in the straw. "I don't know," Clara said, wiping at her eyes. "I was just thinking about my parents, wishing they could see this, see how happy I am, wishing they could have known you." "They'd be proud of you," Cole said quietly. "Your father especially. He'd see how you've built a life from nothing, how you've turned pain into purpose." "You think so?" "I know so." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think your father would say if he could see you now? He'd say, 'That's my girl. She fell down, and she got back up, just like I taught her.'" Clara leaned against Cole's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I miss them. Even with everything I have now, I still miss them." "Of course you do. Love doesn't end just because life moves forward. You carry them with you, in the way you work with horses, in the kindness you show to frightened creatures, in the strength you showed that day at the auction." Cole wrapped his arm around her. "They're part of what made you who you are, and who you are is extraordinary." They sat together in the quiet barn until Clara's tears dried, and peace settled over her again. It was one of the many things she loved about Cole. He didn't try to fix her sadness or tell her she shouldn't feel it. He just sat with her in it until it passed. As fall deepened into winter, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be sure before telling Cole. She finally chose a morning in early November when they were working together in the breeding barn, checking on the horses. "Cole," she said, her heart hammering, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from examining a mare's hoof, his expression shifting to concern when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually." Clara took a deep breath. "We're going to have a baby. In June, I think." Cole's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally, pure joy. He dropped the mare's hoof and crossed the stall in 2 strides, sweeping Clara up in his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice choked. "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby," Clara confirmed, laughing at his reaction. Cole set her down carefully, as if she might break. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to rest? Should you even be in the barn? There's dust and—" "Cole." Clara took his face in her hands. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been having babies and working ranches for centuries. I'll be fine. But I'll be careful, I promise. But I'm not going to stop living my life just because there's a baby coming." Clara softened her tone. "Though I appreciate the concern, it's sweet." "Sweet," Cole repeated, like he was testing the word. "I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents." A shadow crossed his face. "Hope I'm better at it than my father was." "You'll be wonderful," Clara said firmly. "You're patient, kind, steady, all the things a child needs. Our baby is lucky to have you." Cole pulled her close again, holding her like she was precious beyond measure. "Our baby," he murmured. "God, Clara, you've given me everything." The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. Margaret was ecstatic, immediately beginning to plan for the nursery and making lists of things they'd need. The ranch hands congratulated them with grins and backslaps, Miguel quietly predicting it would be a boy who'd be riding before he could walk. Even the neighbors sent gifts and well wishes when word reached them. But as Clara's pregnancy progressed through the winter months, complications arose. She was sick far more than was normal, unable to keep food down for weeks at a time. By January, she'd lost weight instead of gaining it, and the doctor Cole brought from Silverton was concerned. "She needs rest," the doctor said. "Complete rest. No heavy work, no long hours in the barn. If she doesn't take care of herself, she could lose the baby." Clara was furious at being confined to the house, frustrated by her body's betrayal. She'd survived losing her parents, being left destitute, the auction, the fire. How could pregnancy, the most natural thing in the world, be the thing that defeated her? "It's not defeat," Cole said one evening when he found her staring out the window at the barn she wasn't allowed to enter. "It's just a different kind of battle. And you're the strongest person I know. You'll win this one too." What if I don't? Claire's voice was small. What if something happens to the baby? Cole came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her growing belly. Then we'll grieve, and we'll heal, and we'll try again if that's what you want. But I'm not going to lose you, Clara. Not to this, not to anything. So you're going to rest and eat when you can and let me take care of you for once. I hate being taken care of, Clara muttered, but she leaned back against him. I know, but you're doing it anyway, because you love our baby more than you hate resting. Cole kissed her temple. And because you love me enough to let me help carry this burden. The winter was long and difficult, but slowly, Claire's condition stabilized. By March, she was keeping food down again. By April, she'd regained the weight she'd lost, and then some, her belly swelling with obvious pregnancy. And by May, she was feeling strong enough to take short walks around the ranch, reconnecting with the horses she'd missed so desperately. Look at you, she said to Copper, who came immediately when she called. The gelding was sleek and healthy now, all trace of his traumatic past erased by patient care and time. You're not even the same horse anymore. Neither are you, Cole observed, standing beside her. The woman I met at the auction was running from pain. The woman standing here is running toward joy. Did you just make a pregnancy joke about me running? Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. Cole grinned. Maybe more of a walking quickly joke. Clara punched his arm lightly, but she was smiling. It felt good to joke again, to feel like herself again after months of being trapped in a body that didn't cooperate. The baby arrived on a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after Clara and Cole's wedding. The labor was long and difficult. Clara had known it would be after the troubled pregnancy. But when the midwife finally placed a squalling, perfect daughter in her arms, every moment of pain and fear was worth it. She's beautiful, Cole said, his voice thick with tears. He sat beside Clara on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, one finger gently touching the baby's tiny fist. She looks like you. She has your eyes, Clara said, studying the infant's face. Storm gray eyes that looked up at her parents with unfocused wonder. What should we name her? They'd discussed names for months but never settled on anything. Now, holding their daughter, Clara knew exactly what felt right. Grace, she said. Grace Elizabeth Harrington. Grace because that's what she is. Undeserved blessing. Elizabeth after my mother. Grace Elizabeth, Cole repeated, testing it out. It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect. I'm exhausted and sweaty and probably look terrible, Clara said, but she was smiling. Perfect, Cole insisted, kissing her forehead. The first months of Grace's life were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. But they were also full of wonder. Grace's first smile, her first laugh, the way she'd quiet immediately when Cole sang to her in his rough but tender voice. Clara watched her husband transform into a father, saw the gentle patience he showed their daughter, and fell even more deeply in love with him. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow, the fire's damage slowly erased by new buildings and renewed prosperity. Clara's training program became regionally known, with people traveling from as far away as California to bring her troubled horses. The breeding program that Cole had envisioned produced a line of horses that became famous for their calm temperaments and willing natures. Grace grew from infant to toddler to a gangly 5-year-old who could ride before she could read and had inherited both her mother's gift with horses and her father's steady determination. She was joined by a brother, Thomas, named after the man who'd saved Cole and Margaret all those years ago. And then another daughter, Hope, named after the filly born the same day Clara agreed to stay at High Ridge. The house on the land Cole had bought was finally built when Grace was 6, a beautiful timber and stone structure that nestled into the hillside exactly as Clara had imagined. Moving from the main house to their own place felt like the final piece of their life clicking into position. But no matter how much time passed, Clara never forgot where she'd come from. Every year on the anniversary of the auction, she made the ride into Silverton with Cole. Both of them mounted on horses they'd trained themselves. They'd walk through the old auction yard, still operating, still smelling of dust and livestock and desperation, and remember. Strange to think how different everything would be if I hadn't come that day, Cole said one year, standing where the auction ring used to be. Strange to think how close I came to giving up entirely, Clara added. If Rosie had sold to someone else, if you hadn't stepped in, I don't know what I would have done. You'd have survived, Cole said with certainty. You're a survivor, Clara. That's who you were then, and it's who you are now. We're survivors, Clara corrected. Both of us, together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Clara back to the ridge where he'd first told her he loved her. The children were with Margaret for the evening, giving them rare time alone. They rode up as the sun was setting, the sky turning the same shades of orange and pink it had been all those years ago. You know what I realized? Cole said as they stood looking out over the valley. Everything good in my life traces back to that decision at the auction. Stepping in to buy Rosie wasn't just about helping you. It was the beginning of everything. Our marriage, our children, the success of the ranch. All of it started that day. Everything good in my life started that day too, Clara said. I thought I'd lost everything, but I was actually standing at the beginning of something better than I'd ever imagined. Cole turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The sapphire ring his mother had worn still gleamed on Clara's finger, joined now by a simple gold band. The best thing I ever brought home wasn't a horse, he said, echoing his wedding vows. It was you. But the best thing I ever found, Clara replied, was a cowboy who saw me when I was invisible, who gave me not just shelter, but a home, who taught me that losing everything could be the beginning of finding everything that matters. They stood together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss on this ridge, that had seen them through fire and loss and renewal. Below them, lights glowed in the windows of High Ridge Ranch, the main house where Margaret lived, the bunkhouse where the hands were finishing their evening meal, their own house where their children slept safe and warm. You know what the ranch hands call you? Cole asked, a smile in his voice. What? The heart of High Ridge. They say I run the ranch, but you make it home. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. It's also true. Cole pulled her close. You took a place that was just land and buildings and made it somewhere people want to be, somewhere they belong. You did that, Clara. Your gift isn't just with horses. It's with healing broken things and giving them reason to trust again. I had a good teacher, Clara said, thinking of her father, and you became an even better teacher yourself. Cole kissed her softly. I love you, Clara Whitfield Harrington. I loved you that day at the auction. I loved you the day we married. I loved you when you gave me our children. And I'll love you every day until I draw my last breath. I love you too, Clara said. My cowboy. My home. They rode back down the ridge as the moon rose, silver light illuminating the path. The ranch spread out below them, a patchwork of corrals and pastures and buildings, all representing years of work and love and stubborn determination not to let disaster have the final word. Clara thought about the girl she'd been at 22, sitting alone at that auction with nothing but a rope halter and fading hope. That girl couldn't have imagined this life, the success, the family, the deep and abiding love. She'd been too focused on survival to dream of flourishing. But the woman Clara had become understood something that girl hadn't. Sometimes you had to lose everything to discover what truly mattered. Sometimes the fall was necessary for the rise. And sometimes the cowboy who said, "She's coming home with me," wasn't taking anything away. He was offering everything you'd never known you needed. As they approached their house, Grace appeared on the porch, waving enthusiastically despite the late hour. Thomas and Hope tumbled out behind her, all three children apparently having convinced Margaret they weren't tired. I thought they'd be asleep, Clara said, but she was smiling. They wanted to wait up for us, Margaret called from the doorway. Something about anniversary presents they made. Cole and Clara dismounted and were immediately swarmed by their children, all talking at once about the drawings they'd made and the flowers they'd picked, and the special song Grace had learned on the old piano in the main house. Clara gathered them close, breathing in the smell of their hair, feeling the solid weight of their small bodies against hers. This, she thought, this was worth everything. The loss, the pain, the fear, the fire. All of it had been the price of admission to a life richer than she'd ever imagined possible. Come on, Cole said, scooping up Thomas while Grace grabbed Clara's hand and Hope wrapped around her leg. Let's go see these presents, and then it's bed for all of you, no arguments. But Papa, Grace started. No arguments, Cole repeated, but his eyes were twinkling. Even on anniversaries, children need sleep. They went inside together, the whole family, into the house that love had built on land that faith had purchased. And as Clara tucked each child into bed, listening to their prayers and promises to be good tomorrow, she understood with perfect clarity that home had never been a place. Home was Cole's hand in hers as they walked down the hallway. Home was the life they'd built together from ash and courage. Home was the family they'd created and the love they'd chosen every single day. She'd been sitting alone at that auction, and the cowboy had said she was coming home with him. And he'd been right. But what he hadn't known, what neither of them could have known, was that she wasn't just coming to his home. She was coming home to herself, to the life she was meant to live, to the love that would define her, to the future that had been waiting all along. Years later, when Clara was old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, they'd ask her to tell the story of how she met their grandfather. And she'd smile, her eyes distant with memory, and say, "I was sitting alone at an auction, and a cowboy said I was coming home with him. And you know what? He was right. I did come home, the long way around, through fire and fear and finding myself. But I came home. And that home, the one we built together, was worth every step of the journey." The children would beg for more details, and she'd tell them about Rosie and the $20 bid, about the fire and the rebuilding, about learning to love again after loss. But the core of the story never changed. A woman alone. A cowboy who saw her. A single moment that changed everything. And a life built from courage, love, and the unshakable belief that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding what matters most. That was the story of Clara Whitfield Harrington. A story of falling and rising, of ash and renewal, of a cowboy's promise and a woman's courage. A story of coming home.